Before we proceed, Mr. Pretorius, I think we must have in mind how far we would go this afternoon. And I don't know whether the arrangement with the President and his team is that we would stop at 4 or 5, or whether, if necessary, he would be available for us to proceed beyond that time. And I don't know your own situation and your team. I'm mentioning that because, one, I don't have an evening session this evening. So if the situation was such that we can go beyond 5 o'clock, I would be available. But the President might have other plans because he might have worked on the basis that we would stop maybe at 4 or 5. But tomorrow we do have an evening session. So I'm mentioning that in case if we don't use some time after 5, after 4 today, tomorrow might not be enough. I'm just giving that information so that while we proceed, everybody would be ready that when we come to 4 o'clock, whether the answer would be we can go up to 5 or we stop at 4, or whether what the position would be. So you might have canvassed that with the President or his team.
Yes, Chair, it's been rather tentatively raised with the President's team on this understanding that he does have a country to run.
Yes.
But
yeah.
I'm sure that they will express their views either now or when the time comes.
Yes. Well, Mr. President, you will indicate what your situation is when either now or later on. So all I was saying is tomorrow we have an evening session, so we would have to finish by 5 o'clock. But in case tomorrow might not be enough, we might go beyond 4 o'clock, beyond 5 o'clock today, but only if that suits everybody, because there might have been other plans if that had not been discussed. But if we have to stop at 5, that's fine as well. Okay, all right.
Thank you, Chairperson. We had envisaged that we would stop at 4,
yes.
But I guess maybe to be accommodative, because there are other issues we have to attend to, 5 o'clock should be fine.
Yes. Yes, well, we could stop at 4. Strictly speaking, the day session goes up to 4, but we normally stretch it a little bit. But if from your side you are comfortable with going up to 5, maybe we should do that. But it just depends. I don't want you to be under pressure because 4 o'clock is generally the normal time.
Yeah. I would wait for another message that will be sent from my office about that, and then we'll indicate that.
Okay, no, that's fine. Even at 4 o'clock, I will ask what the position is.
Okay.
And if we have to stop at 4, we'll stop at 4. If we can go up to 5, then we'll go up to 5.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you. We may proceed then, Mr. Pretorius.
I wanted to move on, Mr. President, to a statement made by Mr. Enoch Godongwana in an interview he gave to a television station on the 15th of April 2021. I don't know if you're aware of it. But he said the following, and the point is a terse one ultimately. The objectives of the time were to change the demographics of the public service. Secondly, to ensure that the transformation agenda is carried out. He's talking about deployment there. The question one may pose in the current conjecture is, have these objectives been achieved? If we look at the demographics of the civil servants as we speak, they are clearly transformed from that perspective. Therefore, that objective has been achieved. If we look at the second, transformation orientation, I think there is no doubt that it has diffused into the public service as a whole. So somebody may then say, is there a necessity to continue doing so? These are debates that we should be engaged on. As you are aware, at the moment, the Minister of Public Service is looking at introducing a policy of what is called a professional civil service. The debate which is taking place in South Africa at the moment will impact on the form and content of the deployment policy. Simply put, he's speaking about the professionalization policy, which perhaps we can talk about later, not now in this context. But he's asking the question, and I'd like to ask you whether this question is being asked within the ANC at the moment, is whether deployment is necessary at all.
Thank you, Chairperson. I did become aware of what Mr. Enoch Godongwana did say, and he starts off his assertion on the basis that transformation was central to the necessity to have a deployment committee. And this started off 1994, because you will recall when we came into government, we found an all-white headed civil service. And it really cut across from the top to near the bottom. And the bottom was largely black people. And the top, the middle, and the below middle were all white. And in the main, male as well. So it was pale males who dominated the civil service. So it was therefore necessary to have a deployment committee that would address that anomaly. But today, we continue to need that type of intervention, because what we are seeking to do is to build a diverse nation. A nation that is united across the various, if you like, cultures that we have in our country, but also gender. And transformation is not a one-day affair. It does not happen all at one go. It is a process that happens over time. And it does need to be guided. It does need a strategic intent. And for instance, one of the key issues I should have alluded to was not only the gender issue, but also the demographic mix. Each time when the deployment committee meets, it looks at that. Are we able to have a diverse sort of deployment of people, so that we don't have an all, say, African component of the civil service, leaving aside white, colored, and Indian, who make up what South Africa is all about. And you therefore need that deployment committee, because that is part of our transformation process. Now, the deployment committee asks itself those questions and seeks to create that balance. Because I've also seen that even in government circles, sometimes it is lost, that focus is lost, and we've always believed that it can be better inspired and it can be better led from the political party point of view. And this, Chairperson, is not unique only to the ANC. If you were to look at what has also happened to other political parties, and I can think of a party that is also in government alongside, say, the ANC, like the Democratic Alliance, they do have that as well. They do, in the end, get approval process for the appointment of people from the party, and sometimes, and this occurred when a case had to be handled by the public protector, and Mr. Bredell had to say, this can't happen until an arm or a structure of the Democratic Alliance had to give its nay or yay. So, without getting into those processes, I'm just alluding to the fact that the deployment committee in other organizations is there, even if they may not call it that. And I guess the ANC, in its exuberance, has gone ahead to say, we will call it a deployment committee. And yet in other cases, it happens as it happens. I know, for instance, and I've referred to it in my affidavit, that even in other countries, I know, for instance, with the UK, particularly under Margaret Thatcher, the question used to be asked, is that person one of us? And there's even a book written to that effect, One of Us. And what that meant was, even in her governance of the UK, they always sought to find people who were one of them. And so this is not unique to the ANC. And you could never say that in Margaret Thatcher's era, they were going through a hardcore transformation process. And maybe it was soft touch, but they still needed to have one of them. And in our case, we are not necessarily saying they must be one of us. We are saying we would like to see that all these requirements are met because they are important for the development of our country and nation building, and making sure that those who are given key positions in our state are representative of who we are as South Africans. Thank you.
In paragraph 32, on page 17,
Are you back in his affidavit?
Yes, Chair.
Okay.
Another issue is raised that may be significant in this discussion, Mr. President, and that is the quote you have placed there by Matheson of the OECD. That's the Organization for Economic and Community Development, I understand. It's an international organization that has many countries as members. Is South Africa a member? I know it's quoted in the survey.
No, we are not a member. We are associated. They've always sought to have us as a member, but we are not a member of the OECD.
Anyway, the quote here deals with the issue of the political loyalties of public servants,
Yes.
the responsiveness of public servants to the policies of the current executive. And what this quote says in your statement is the following. Political involvement in administration is essential for the proper functioning of a democracy. Without this, an incoming political administration would find itself unable to change policy direction. That is the import of that quote. There are some caveats which follow, but they're more strongly stated. And I see that in your opening statement, care was taken to deal with that issue. Clearly well prepared. But in Matheson, and it's in Bundle 2 if you need to look at it, he says the following. In their quest for legitimacy, democratic regimes find themselves having to balance two values that can be in some tension: fair and politically partisan public service delivery, and subject to the law, importantly subject to the law, the responsiveness of public servants to the policies of the current executive. Now, we know that that is dealt with in our Constitution, the degree to which the public service must be fair, impartial, and independent, and hopefully that will be reflected in legislation in time. He goes on to say, neutrality in the sense of political non-partisanship in public administration is of course a precondition for ensuring that regardless of their political orientation, citizens are treated fairly and in an equitable manner. Operationally, it is delivered by emphasizing professionalism, merit, and competence amongst public servants. These values are important to the level of justice and continuity in public administration, arguably a significant determinant of how much trust citizens place in their system of government. At the same time, public servants must be accountable to the government for the effective delivery of its programs and responsiveness of the administration to the government of the day within the law and its constitutions is key to the effective implementation of government policies. And the report goes on to show how different countries have developed institutional arrangements which balance these two concerns. To avoid the extremes of a self-serving public service immune to political leadership on the one hand, or an over-politicized public service hostage to patronage and serving partisan rather than national interests on the other. Now, there's clearly a tension expressed. It was mentioned in your opening statement, Mr. President. To what extent, and leave aside the history, are the future plans of the party seeking to balance those two considerations, and how will that be achieved?
Well, there needs to be a balance between what I would say the political involvement of the governing party that I spoke about with ensuring that there is proficiency, technical proficiency, fairness in terms of service delivery, and that those who execute such are able to be neutral enough and not to be biased in a partisan way. Now, that is quite important, and it is what we want to engender going forward, to ensure that when it comes not only to service delivery, but also to, for instance, appointments of people, be it for public employment projects, that public servants should be colorblind when it comes to that. They should not be partisan. They should seek to serve the people of South Africa with neutrality, with fairness, and they should demonstrate their own technical capacity and capability. That is so necessary for them to do so, because the people that we serve are not blind. When something is done on a partisan basis, they see it. And once it is done that way, it basically means we are failing the people, and we are therefore even violating their own basic rights as citizens of our country. So we need to guard against that. And we need to inculcate that culture. And we will seek even to have that approach also encoded in regulations, also in legislation, to the extent that we can. It is so important, and that is why I, in my statement in chief, if you like, referred to the OECD and Mattison and al. That they put the case so well in that document that much as you can have political involvement, particularly when as a governing party you want to ensure that your mandated positions are adhered to, you do, however, need to balance that with that technical proficiency, non-partisanship as you implement. Because a party like the ANC leads society, and it cannot be seen to be partisan in favor of certain people when it executes.
Sorry, Mr. President.
It's not my fault.
Yeah, no, it's not yours, Mr. President. Will everybody please switch off their cell phones? Okay, let's continue.
So it is therefore important, and I would agree with Mr. Pretorius that we do need to have that balance. But I would say that balance needs to have a foundation, and that foundation is what I spoke about. Thank you.
Mr. President, you've spoken about a move or intention to introduce a policy of professionalization of the civil service. What problems would that move seek to address? And what is envisaged?
It would seek to address the problems that we have had where, and I think Mr. Godongwana refers to that in his interview, where we do have, and admittedly so, we do have some people in our civil service who are ill-qualified, who are not that fit for the purpose, who do not have those qualifications that are necessary. Now, we want to professionalize the civil service, and that will happen in a variety of ways. And we're not talking about trucking people out. We're talking about capacitating those people, having them properly trained. And that is why the School of Government, the National School of Government, has moved into top gear now. Moved into top gear in the sense that it's really literally come alive in terms of its curricular offerings, in terms of ensuring that many cohorts in the civil service do attend certain courses. And we do want to move to a point where, nearly everyone in the public service, from president right down, does attend lessons and courses at the School of Government on an annual basis, where I, even as president, would know that I do need to go and spend a week at the School of Government and to address that incapacity that we have. Say, for instance, the grouping of people who are ill-qualified should be capacitated, courses should be crafted for them, and they should acquire the necessary skills. So professionalizing the civil service, that would be part of that process. But also going forward, it would mean that we then appoint people who are fit for purpose, people who are well experienced. But of course, when we get the young people into the civil service, the issue of experience is not something that, it's actually something that the young people have said, please discard that, because we want to come in, and once we are in, then you should equip us with all the necessary skills. And I have agreed with young people that exactly what we should do, and we should now find a way of encoding that. But in the end, professionalizing the civil service means that we want to increase the capacity of the state. That is something that I am really, if you like, obsessed about. Because many of the challenges that we face in terms of implementation of our decisions and our policies revolves around the incapacity that we have in the state. And it is a fairly straightforward matter that we can address through this professionalization, through getting people who are fit for purpose, who have the experience and the expertise, and if need be, we go out and seek them out and headhunt them so that we bolster the capability of the state. And that way, I think we will have achieved a great deal in this era of reforming processes that were damaged in the past.
Yes. In your preparation Mr. President, you've no doubt been forewarned of the answer to the parliamentary question by the Minister of Public Service and Administration, Mr. Chunu. In a reply to a question, he stated, according to information from Persal, that's the accounting system for government employees, as at 15 February 2021, there are currently a total of 9,477 senior managers employed in the public service. Out of this total, 3,301 members do not have the required qualifications. However, it needs to be stated that many departments do not capture the qualification information on Persal, and therefore the information in the tables below are skewed. This information also excludes the Department of Defense and State Security Agency. However, the statistics need to be adjusted. There does seem to be a quite serious problem about qualifications in the public service. And is that problem recognized?
That problem is recognized, and that is precisely the problem that we will now address through the professionalization of the public service. Now, it is a lot of people, 3,301. And I would say we are not about to chuck those people out. If anything, we as the state are to blame for having brought in people who are ill-qualified. We therefore need to address the problem, but we need to address it humanely. We need to address it taking into account the mistakes that we have made and the human rights or the rights of those people as per worker-employer. And what it then calls on us to do is to be innovative, to be very creative of how we are going to capacitate all these people. And it's not like, they are dunderheads or they do nothing. They're doing something, and we just need to channel their capability, their knowledge, and their ability to do the work. So it is recognized, and that's precisely what we are now going to be addressing. The good thing, Chairperson, is that we have recognized the problem. And often when you address problems and try to find solutions, you should first know what you are dealing with. You must know your business. You must be able to count what you are dealing with. And once you've done that, then the solutions will come quite more easily, and you are then able to execute.
Mr. President, thus far in relation to the issue of deployment, we've dealt with elements of the hard definition of employment, that it's much more than recommendation.
Yeah.
And we've dealt with the softer definition, which is that it's recommendation only, and we've looked at the exceptions that fill the space between. And I think there's been a fair statement on your part, if I may comment, shouldn't, that regulation in the form of legislation and policy reform is underway. But there is an aspect of appointments that may well fall right outside the question of deployment. And that is what has happened in the period under review in the past. And we've heard some 3 years of evidence of appointments which may have something to do with a definition of patronage. You've used that word patronage, and we'll come to that in due course in a different context. But if we look at appointments, particularly within state-owned entities in the past 10 years, and I'm going to just recite a few for you and ask for your knowledge and comment. In Transnet, Mr. Molefe, Gama, Ramasabudi, Peter, Singh, Sharma, Makwanazi, Shane, Seleke, Mabaso, Danel, the entire board, including the chair, Prasa, Eskom, Molefe, Singh, Koko, Machila, Nkubani, Pamensky, Matona, SAA, Udumayeni, Law Enforcement, Arthur Fraser, Tom Mayani, Burning Intermenza, Sean Abrams. Now, clearly it would be unfair to discuss with you all the evidence relating to each particular appointment. But there is a common thread, certainly, in the evidence that goes through all of these appointments and the dismissals associated with them, that they have been linked with certainly a definition of patronage. I'd like to ask you, please, what your knowledge was of these, what your comment is. Did these have anything to do with the deployment policy? Did the existence of the deployment policy have any relationship to these appointments and dismissals? I know that I'm making a cardinal error in questioning here, but this is a commission, not a court, and I'm rolling up a whole lot of questions into one, and if I carry on, the DCJ will take me to task.
It's after lunch, Mr. Pretorius. Yes,
Well, maybe I'll be excused for that reason. What was going on here? What was your knowledge?
Yes, that is quite broad sweep, I must say. It's a broad sweep because each one would need to be looked at on its own merits, and you will find that a number of those never even featured in the deployment committee, and I will need to do some recalling to see whether any of those that you've counted ever even featured, and to my recollection, not really. And let's accept, Chairperson, that some of those deployments were done in a particular era and in a particular way. And right now, as we look at that past slate, where they're able to look at it and say, we actually need to do things differently. Move away from those types of deployments that happened and that ended up being, some of them being deployments that were not fit for purpose, as I said in my opening statement. And so I would not now be able to particularize each one of them because they happened as they did, and right now, I would say the deployment committee would not have dealt with a whole lot of those. And I would say that the deployment committee today would deal with matters in a way that we've outlined. The professionalism and all that would be the real focus.
Well, perhaps the problem lies with the question in that it's too broad and too general. And in that sense, to ask for a particular approach, put it at its least optimistic. But the first point is that there has been evidence that there were appointments influenced by or made by the former president to fit another purpose, an ulterior and illegitimate purpose. Were you aware of that? Is that evidence known to you?
No, I was not, as I said in my statement and in the bulk of my statement or affidavit. And as I said, some of these state capture issues became only evident in time as we moved on. And that is why I even referred to the statement by Minister, or let me call him Comrade Fikile Mbalula, for purposes of the type of evidence I'm giving now here. Because when he mentioned in an NEC meeting how he had come to know about his appointment, even at that time, we were not alive to the fact that there was state capture and there was something horribly wrong going on. So some of these appointments would have happened in that course of time, and one, with hindsight, then became aware that there was a common thread, and if you joined the dots, you would find that there was something that was amiss, that was really happening. So at the time, and some of them would have happened even before I was even deputy president, the process had been ongoing, and only became evident much later what actually was happening.
One interpretation of past events, Mr. President, is that